this would be, okay, got it. Okay. So this would include Mary Katani. Mary, hi.
Hi.
Kirsten, where are you? I know I saw you. Oh, there you are. Patricia, there you are. And Rebecca.
It's a business
Rebecca.
meeting.
Oh, okay.
Right.
And there are two people who are not here today, and that would be Susan Lowenz, who could not make it, and Margaret Brazulius will be joining us in the fall. I'm really sorry to the new members that we're meeting this way and not in person. We are really looking forward to seeing you in person at the Amherst Women's Club for our March and April meetings. And of course, we'll have the elections in April. And we have traditionally had a luncheon meeting for the May meeting at a local restaurant. This year, our meeting is going to be held on the 3rd of May. And assuming we don't have to worry about COVID, is it okay with all of you if we went ahead and did a luncheon at a restaurant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So I believe Sheila Clem and Honore are the luncheon organizers. So,
Good.
I will leave this up to you, the two of you, I guess, to do the arrangements. And I have just one other item before we introduce ourselves to Holly. And this has to do with a vote that we need to take on Donna Kosher. Can we it's kind of awkward to do it this way. I did warn Hank that we will be doing this. Is this what might be the best way to proceed here?
Just make a motion and we'll
I think
raise our.
so, and then and then it can be unanimous if it is. So Susan, you made a motion to accept Donna Kosher. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, perfect. So all those in favor? Okay, unanimous.
Yes.
Perfect.
Excellent.
So I will invite Donna to join us in March. All right. So now, Holly, before I introduce Holly to all of you and introduce her with a very short bio, perhaps we should introduce ourselves to you. Holly? Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be nice. I mean, we're a small group and then, you know.
Yep. So let's start with Maxine, since you are to the left of me.
Okay, I'm Maxine Jones, and I've been a member for what seems like quite a long time, but several people here have been members a little bit longer than I am. Anyway, here I am.
Holly, I think, wanted to know a little about your travels. Is that correct?
Yeah, if there's something you love about travel, favorite place, anything.
Oh, okay. Well, we've been traveling for years, and we just like to go to different places. When our children were young, we would go to, well, we went to France a couple of times, but to the Caribbean during their school vacations in the spring. Since then, we have been all over Europe. I think we've been in every country but one. And we particularly enjoy Eastern Europe. And we've been to Russia, the Soviet Union, Russia a couple of times. Our early trips were when it was the Soviet Union, and then later when it became Russia again. And the reason for these trips is because my husband taught Russian history at the university. And over the years, he made a lot of friends there whom we visited. And when Russia opened up a little bit in the early 90s, we had a lot of Russian visitors to Amherst as well and enjoyed it very much. Okay. Since then, let me see, I think our last trip was to Africa. So that was exciting, something I had wanted to do for many, many years.
Okay, so Gigi?
Oh, hi, I'm Gigi Barnhill, and I've only lived in Amherst for, I guess, 8 years. So I haven't been a member of Travelers very long, maybe 6 years. I'm the archivist, so just want to remind everybody, if you've give a nice paper and you want it preserved in the archives, please send it to me. My husband and I have traveled, I don't know, to Europe several times. We've done, some nice standard trips, the Galapagos. I don't know, Upper Amazon was fun. We like cruises because I guess I'm a lazy traveler and I don't like making a lot of arrangements day by day. So cruises are very pleasant. Anyway, it's kind of fun to hear about where people have been in this group and learn about their other interests as well. We don't always just focus on travel, interestingly enough.
Okay, AJ?
Hi, I've been in travel probably about 6 years also. I did a lot of traveling when I was young. I was in the Peace Corps for 2 years, so I lived in Malaya for 2 years. And then when I came back to this country, I was married, and my husband, we went to Kathmandu, Nepal, and our first son was born there a long time ago. I mean, he was 53 years, I guess. But we've done a lot of traveling in India, Kashmir. We've done some sleeping out on the desert in Kashmir. We've done Europe. The places that I really like to go are not so safe. We've been to Turkey a few times. The places that I like to go, I'm glad I went when I was younger. I went to Macau, those things. They're not so safe now. I mean, I'm not even thinking about going back to Istanbul, which we loved. I'm thinking, oh dear, do we really want to do that right now? But that's it. Other than that, I love to hear where everybody's going now.
You're next on my screen, so.
Oh, okay. I know Holly. We live in the same town, and her mother is my good friend. I've traveled in Europe. My favorite places that I've traveled have been China. I lived in Japan and then India. Those are at the top of the list, and I've been to the Caribbean a few times and around Europe. I think if there's anything else interesting. And unfortunately, I'm now a widow, and so I don't know how much European traveling or any kind of traveling I'm going to be doing for a while. Although I do have a friend to travel with. Next to me on the screen.
Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. This is my first time coming to the Travelers Club. I'm so thrilled. And I'm just taking notes because it's so interesting to hear all the things that places people have gone. I obviously also like to travel quite a bit. I don't like to plan travel, which I think is a bit odd for someone who likes to travel. It stresses me out. So my husband and I generally we sign up for these bike tours. We do a couple a year usually. We have a company that we love called VBT. They used to be Vermont Bike Tours, and now they're owned by a giant conglomerate, Xanterra. But we've gone all over the world with them biking. And it's not like roughing it biking. I don't carry any of my own things. We need like a hotel at the end of the day and snacks in between, like nice fancy snacks. So we've done many of those, and most recently we kind of threaded the Delta Omicron needle and went in August to the corner up. We went to like Italy, Slovenia, and Austria, and we biked all through that little corner, and it was absolutely amazing. Not only was it gorgeous, but it was almost all on protected bike paths, which all for some reason felt like they went downhill. It was like glorious. I don't know how it happened. Not all of our trips are bike trips. I've gotten to travel a bit for work, most interestingly to Pakistan, I think 3 times. And we've had some other cool trips. I'll also say I owe some of my love for travel to my mother-in-law, my husband's mom, who was a huge traveler. She did the Rhodes Scholar trips. She did the Viking she did everything. And then she actually, it was 5 years ago now that she unfortunately died while hiking in Bali. And we
Mhm.
always said like, that is kind of, although we wished she was, that didn't happen, that she was still with us. It was like she did what she was doing, what she loved. And she lived her life to the end, traveling and having adventures. So I hope that that's me.
Mm.
Catherine,
Okay. Well, I've always done something foreign, like Honore, who really did it. I grew up in Mexico. And then after John and I got married, we just kept doing it. That was his business. Latin America first, lots of places in Latin America. Spent a lot of time in Venezuela when it was maybe not so much fun to be in Venezuela. People walking around with AK-47s, and then Far East, China, Japan, Malaysia. But the most fun was the sisters' trips that I took with my sister and a friend and her sister. And these were after our children were older and we were footloose and fancy free. The four women could just figure out where we wanted to go and go. Nice, a van and driving all around southern France and Spain into the Barcelona area and having fun in there. Let me see, Baltic, Russia, Scandinavia. Was fun going to England, going around England. Scotland, of course, was a lot of fun. Ended up in France for 9/11, which was getting stuck in Paris, which is, right now I can say it with a little bit of a smile on my face. It wasn't very much fun at the time, but actually it was very nice. We met an awful lot of people who say, oh, you're stuck, you want to come for dinner, which was very nice. Then an awful lot of 3 trips to Alaska with my sister. And that's fun, except I would always get into trouble. Oh, we got to go on this hike. Oh, we have to go look at these bears. Oh, you got to get in this helicopter. We're going to go on top of the glacier. That sort of stuff. So it was a lot of fun. Lots of traveling.
thank you. Honore,
Well, I guess I started out my life traveling. I was born in the town where Pancho Villa was assassinated.
oh,
That was one of its claims to fame. My father was a metallurgical engineer, so I was born in Mexico. I grew up there, and I was married in San Luis Potosí to a guy from St. Louis, Missouri. And we have loved travel. We've been to all of the countries in South America. We've been to Africa, to India, where we stayed for a while because my husband taught a semester over there, and then all of the countries in Europe. And we've been to Alaska and Hawaii and all those places too. But our last trip was going to be to Antarctica. We had all our tickets and everything. And then unfortunately, I got sick and we didn't get to go. So that was kind of the ultimate end of going there. But we did see Alaska. So I guess that was kind of like going there. But I loved all of the countries. And I think I like the ones, I have not been to China, but I love the countries that were a little bit different, like Africa and India. I guess because I love South America and I loved going to all of the pre-Columbian ruins because I did my graduate work in Latin American art history. So it was fun, but I'm sort of staying home with the computer these days, unfortunately.
Joanne,
Hi, my name is Joanne Brown, and I have enjoyed traveling. I think it's been one of the most interesting things about life, about education, about learning, about other cultures. We lived in Canada, so I have been coast to coast in Canada, from Vancouver to Newfoundland several times, been to Alaska, been all over the British Isles, Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland, been throughout Europe, including Eastern Europe, been to Asia, China a couple times, Japan, Myanmar, Thailand, and we are planning a trip to Vietnam and Cambodia in 2020, which unfortunately was canceled by us due to COVID. Also been to North Africa, to Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia, and to Southern Africa, also to Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, been to a few countries in South America, and just loved all of it, especially loved different cultures. So hopefully, I don't know whether there'll be more traveling anymore or not.
Thank you. Mary? Do you want to
Hi,
share with
I'm
us
Mary.
just a few places you've been to?
Is there more than one Mary? Or should I go ahead?
Mary Katani.
Okay.
Welcome, Mary.
Hi, Louise. I'm seeing people I know. I'm so happy and pleased to be part of this group. I'm retired, but my work, the second career that second and third careers that I had were involved a lot of traveling because I was working in study abroad. And the first group with a Scandinavian group, and the second group was with a French group. So I spent a lot of time in Scandinavia and in France during that. But my husband's from Argentina, and we have an apartment in Buenos Aires, and we spent a lot of time in Argentina as well for more exotic location. We've spent a lot of time abroad, one way or another. The most exotic location we've been to, I guess you'd say, is Cambodia, where Eduardo was teaching. He's a mathematician, retired from the university, and we spent 5 weeks in Phnom Penh and Siem Reap, and also we went to Vietnam during that time. So that was an exotic locale for us. We've not been to China. I could start listing the places we have not been. But I have been to Iceland 33 times, so that's something that I can brag about. I went with students to Scandinavia 3 times a year over a period of 10 years, and always stopped in Iceland coming and going. So it added up to, I think it was 33. So anyway, I love to travel, and I hope COVID will go away or shut up and mind its own business soon enough, and we can get going again.
Thank you. Kirsten?
Hi, my name is Kirsten, and I'm going to try to keep this very short. Thank you for inviting me. This is my first meeting. I'm Danish. Even though I've lived here for 50 years, I still consider myself Danish. So needless to say, a lot of my travel, every year, several times a year, I go to Denmark. And so does my husband, who is a Scandinavian scholar. And we've spent sabbaticals and several times in Denmark, and a year in England too. So I'm a retired obstetrical nurse, worked for 40 years at Franklin Medical Center at the birthplace. And other places I've been, very briefly, I've traveled with my husband mostly to Europe. He's not so very interested in anything else, although we've been to Australia, New Zealand, and China together. But other than that, I traveled with girlfriends, one of them being Mary. She and I went to Peru together a few years ago, and that was a great trip. And I've traveled with Danish girlfriends to Jordan and places in Europe. So that's it for me. And, oh no, I want to say one thing more. Since the pandemic, I have been traveling on foot in the valley, and there's hardly a trail I have not traveled.
Good.
Okay, Sheila?
Well, again, rather than listing places, I'd say my first love of travel came when I spent a year abroad when I was a junior in college in England, but was able to do a lot of travel. My parents thought that I was using the Euro pass on trains all the time when actually I was hitchhiking, but that's okay. They got over that, and so did I. And then the other time I lived kind of abroad was we lived in Puerto Rico for 3 years after I married my husband and we had children. And that was kind of being abroad. It was living in a different culture and speaking Spanish, and nothing like Honoré, but nevertheless, it was fun. But I've done a lot of traveling and following children. There was a wonderful year, I think it was 1989, when my son was in Japan and my daughter was in the Philippines. And I was teaching, and we were able to visit both of them. And that was a marvelous experience. Going to Tibet on a China trip was wonderful too. I would say that working for Habitat for Humanity in Honduras was a lovely experience too. I tell people I'm preparing something for the Travelers Club, and they think that we all travel together. And, that's, I suppose, a logical assumption. But the fact we do travel together by sharing our different experiences. My biggest, most recent kick during COVID is I'm passionate about canals. And we were able, my daughter and son-in-law and I were able to do an Erie Canal. This is COVID times, and we wanted to stay close to home. We did an Erie Canal trip and rented our own boat and did some biking and walking. And then most recently, it was the C&O Canal in Maryland that we enjoyed. But I'm passionate about the Caledonian Canal in Scotland. I've been kind of searching my roots, and that's Scotland and Ireland. And my hope is, it's very modest hope, finally to get to travel and travel that Caledonian Canal. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, I was able to see Belfast in a recent trip to Ireland. And I'm very concerned about what's going to be happening in Ireland. So I was really happy to get to see that. And finally, I'd say that intergenerational travel, since my husband died, has been wonderful, because I've been traveling with my daughter and grandchildren here and there. And it's amazing the different takes we each have on a given experience. I mean, even gift shops, we go off in different directions and have a lot of laughs about it. So I'd say that traveling has really been a major part of my life. And I certainly hope to continue. I'm going to get to that Caledonian Canal if it's the last thing I do. So COVID, go away so we can play.
Well, I have a confession to make. I'm a little bit of a tough timekeeper, and it's 3:56, and I wanted Holly to start at 4. And so unless the rest of us can zip through it in 4 minutes, I mean, if you all think we should continue in this vein, we can. But I think we should probably have Holly start a presentation, don't you think?
Yeah.
What do you all? Okay. Yes. All right. So so let me present a very abbreviated bio on Holly. Holly Linton's presentation is entitled 10,000 Haystacks. She's a photographer whose work for the past decade has focused on understanding rural communities in the United States through the lens of agricultural history, current industry, and ritual. Holly received a MFA in photography from Bard College and a BA in psychology from Yale, where she also studied photography. Holly's work has been exhibited internationally and featured in many publications, including The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Boston Globe, Oxford American, and Art News. She's also a recipient of numerous awards and grants, such as the Aaron Siskind Individual Photographers Fellowship and the Syngenta Photography Award, among others. Holly has been a visiting lecturer at Amos College and the Aegean Center for the Fine Arts in Paros, Greece. She was recently awarded a postdoctoral research fellowship at Yale. Finally, she's also the daughter of Susan Linton.
Yay.
So a big, huge welcome to you, Holly. We're so thrilled you're here and we wish we could be with you in person.
Yeah, well, maybe when COVID abates, if anybody wants to come to the studio or, you know, see how the project progresses or other work. So I did prepare a PowerPoint. I guess if people can mute themselves, just so we don't get like background noise and things, that would be helpful.
How do we make Holly bigger? Ah, there she is. Good.
Well, it was helpful to hear a little bit about where everybody's been, and I have some overlap in terms of my husband's British and I've lived in Europe and been there a bunch, and traveled to Africa, which actually instigated one of my earlier series. And just hearing the Scandinavian references made me think about bringing up that one of the interesting things about making work in the United States is you become really in tune with which populations sort of, as people moved west and colonized areas of the US, where they came from. So a lot of the people that I'm going to be showing you photographs of today came from Scandinavian countries, although that's not the only place they came from. And I thought I would actually start. I'm gonna, can you let me share my screen? Okay. Oops. And then tell me, can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I thought I would actually start, ironically, with a poem about travel. So this poem, it's an excerpt from an Elizabeth Bishop poem that I've actually chosen as an epigraph for a book I have coming out this spring, which is a series of mine called Barehanded. And some of the photographs that I'm going to show you today and from 10,000 Haystacks are actually going to be in this book. I don't really think of my series as having hard, fast lines. So, you know, they float into each other, and often as I'm ending one project and beginning another, especially. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit and show you a few pictures from this Barehanded project, because it's what got me to this area in the first place. But first I'm going to read this poem, because while she was in a completely different country than the US when she was writing it, I think it really, to me, epitomizes what I feel when I photograph and why I photograph, and also some of the questions that making photographic work raises. So this is an excerpt from the middle of the poem. Think of the long trip home. Should we have stayed at home and thought of here? Where should we be today? Is it right to be watching strangers in a play in the strangest of theaters? What childishness is it that while there's a breath of life in our bodies, we are determined to rush to see the sun the other way around? The tiniest green hummingbird in the world, to stare at some inexplicable old stonework, inexplicable and impenetrable at any view, instantly seen and always, always delightful. Oh, we must dream our dreams and have them too. And have we room for one more folded sunset, still quite warm? But surely it would have been a pity not to have seen the trees along this road, really exaggerated in their beauty, not to have seen them gesturing like noble pantomimes robed in pink. So, the book will be out this spring. If people have more interest, you can always contact me later. And then I also put together this kind of flow chart, which is how I make work in the world. And as Sheila pointed out in my bio, I was a psychology major. I put together and designed a few studies when I was younger. And the way that I approach psychology is a lot of the way that I approach photography, or you could say that my psychology training really factors into how I make photographs. So I usually start my projects with some sort of observation or intuition, or since we are talking about travel today and a love of travel, sometimes it's just a desire to go someplace or a curiosity about a place. And you know, then if it's someplace I want to go back, I'll often find a reason to make a photographic project there. And I often kind of start from a place of hypothesis. So, you know, it's not just that I want to go to Pennsylvania and see what's happening there. I might, you know, with Barehanded anyway, I was thinking about our relationship to nature and big agriculture and a kind of pervasive feeling that the US media painted the natural world as a place of danger. And, you know, since everybody here has traveled to places that are maybe inherently more dangerous, you know, we know that that there's exhilaration and beauty and, you know, something to me just larger than life in these wild places. So anyway, so I have these hypotheses, I create a sort of photographic investigation, and then along the way, my photographs are my results. And often I will reframe my hypothesis or my my initial thinking that got me to make the project in the first place, and sort of redefine what the project means. So when I started Barehanded, which I did in 2007, it was really jumping off of a previous project where I've been photographing in my teeny tiny backyard in Weehawken, New Jersey, as if I was on safari in Tanzania. And through the process of making that work, it was the time when West Nile virus was a big deal, and you know, our backyards were being sprayed, and we were being told that they were dangerous places to be. And so I was thinking about that, and I was also thinking about you know, feedlots and what big ag was really doing to our environment. And so I decided I wanted to look for people that had a more direct way of working, a way of gaining what they needed or reaping benefits. So this is a beekeeper who raises bees, and you know, he makes honey, he gathers sustenance, but he's not wrecking the land to do it. And in pretty much every industry, there's that line. So even in beekeeping, which I think, you know, at least I, before I delved into it, thought was a pretty environmentally sound practice, learned that, you know, there's a whole range in beekeeping where it's better for the bees or not so good for the bees. So this was the first picture I made in the series. I really wanted them not to be photo documentary in style. I wanted a kind of more allegorical, mythological, metaphorical, you know, magical, you name it, kind of take. So I would basically show up, I would do research, I would show up, and I would wait for that magic to unfold. So fast forward to 2018. So that picture was made in 2007, and I'm going to show you some more pictures from Barehanded, but this is a little preview of 10,000 Haystacks. So fast forward to 2018, I had learned about this haystacking process in Montana that was invented there called beaver slide haystacking. And I went to photograph it with the thinking that I would make just a couple of pictures for barehanded, and that would be that. But what ended up happening was an unfolding of this whole way of working and multi-generations that I didn't expect. And I realized that it had to be its own project. But before I come to that, I'll just show you a few more from Barehanded, which took me to different parts of the US. This is actually my daughter, Indigo Dyeing in South Carolina. The project was supported by both grants and awards and sometimes commissions, where I would have a lot of control over where I was going and what I was photographing, but it was funded by different entities. This is local. This is here in Shutesbury. So I photographed in the Pioneer Valley for this project quite a bit. And he's one of the last sheep shearers, Kevin Ford, to shear by hand. So this is also out in Montana. This is at a CSA farm. And part of what I try to do as a photographer is, I mean, I make certain rules for myself about what I'm interested in and what I'm looking for. So my work focuses on movement and gesture a lot. But then I also break them. So I used to say that I never photographed vegetables because they didn't move. But I went into this CSA barn and I loved the garlic and I really wanted to make a picture there. And then everyone else in the picture, aside from my daughter, who I stuck in there because it was going to be a very long exposure, are youth who work at the farm who have come through either the sort of juvenile prison system or drug rehab, and they have a communal meal every day. So this is sort of my, Last Supper picture. This is another one of the beekeeper. This is in an Audubon protected swamp forest in South Carolina called Beadler Forest. And so it's never been logged. And they're drumming on the hollow cypress knees. So I think about kind of communing. A lot of this work in this project does deal with people who are working. This is a shrimper in South Carolina. And I've gained permission to photograph them while at work, but I also think about ritual and our connection to the land and what we do sort of more recreationally. This is in Oklahoma and he's surrounded by mayflies, which I later learned after I made the picture only live for one day. So there's also a lot of, most of the people I photograph say there's no such thing as a coincidence, but there's a lot of sort of magical happenstance, serendipity. This is at the Cummington Fair here in Cummington. This is also in Shutesbury. And then I spent time photographing in the tobacco barns, many of which, if everyone's driven around, or if you drive 47, for example, from Sunderland to Amherst or to Hadley, know that many of these barns are now gone and have been torn down. So the other thing that tends to happen in my work, where I suppose it's an interest of mine, though it's not always planned, is that many of the practices that I photograph are in the process of ceasing to exist. And the tobacco barns were an interesting, it was really the beginning of me thinking about the land, stewardship of the land and history in a different way, and sustainability, because prior to making these pictures, I was thinking about the project as being really focused on what would be considered kind of a green, organic, healthy sustainability. But I think, as we know from living in this community, that sustainability is really a bigger question than that. Like, it affects our school populations, it affects the economy. It's, how a region or a rural community is sustained is a more complicated issue than just growing organic food, that we all want our land and our environments and our own personal health to be as healthy as possible. But I think people tend to deduce what sustainability means down to like a catchphrase. So for a while I had trouble putting these pictures in the series, though, because, tobacco is not healthy. But then I figured that really, it shows what is here. There was also an element to danger in working in the barns that, I wanted people to be aware of. And ultimately my pictures are not necessarily, about the thing depicted. If somebody looks at this picture and sees Ascension, that's fine. They don't need to know that it's in a tobacco barn. So I always like the pictures to move in these different directions. This is also in South Carolina. More shrimping. So shrimping is a declining sort of industry as well. This is catfish noodling in Oklahoma. And now this is back in Montana. So when I went to Montana the first time, I was on this commission from a company called Shinola, which was big into kind of supporting American-made products. And they were going to create a publication, which never came to be, but they commissioned me to make optimistic pictures in America, and gave me the choice of where I wanted to go. And I chose Montana because while I had grown up in Colorado in part, Montana had this kind of what I felt like was a lot of cliches about it, or what stereotypes of what we would imagine, like you think of fly fishing or you think of ranching in a certain way. And I really wanted to dig and find out what was underneath those perceptions, or what was sort of disseminated as what that part of the West was. So when I began this project, though, it was tricky because I basically had the commission and I was told 3 weeks before I was going, to just go and find. And my way of working is very word of mouth. I like to find out what's happening that people might not know about. So it was the first time that I really used social media in my research, and I put out a call on Facebook and I got various responses, and I just started calling people. So this particular picture is of a remaining building, like a homestead building on a ranch that was homesteaded and is still in the same family who claimed the property in the 1800s, and they're still ranching today. They do happen to have an organic line of beef that they raise for locally, that they lose money on. And then unfortunately, with the majority of ranches in Montana, the cattle that are raised to a young age and then sold to feedlots. Although, one of the things that I learned through growing is kind of what that process really means. And that for the most part, I think the ranchers are really blamed for what's happening in the beef industry, and thinking it originates there, which is, more that if you bought a cow from the ranch, it would be pretty much of an organic cow that's raised in wild land in the mountains in the summer and on native grasses in the winter. So I made a few pictures during that trip, the Last Supper one included, and that's when I learned about this beaver slide haystacking process. But I didn't photograph it then, so that was 2016. So it took me 2 years to get back there in 2018. And like I said before, I thought I would just make a few pictures for Barehanded. This was one of the pictures from that first trip. The haystacks are 30 feet tall. So this gives you a sense of what they look like. The one on the left is the previous year's haystack. And the ones on the right is actually a double stack that they're in the process of building. So they compact quite a bit, even in the few weeks after they're initially built, but they can last up to 3 years. So they kind of have the structure of a thatched roof. So even though they get wet and the snow and the rain, they don't break down and mold the way a bale of hay does. So if you create a bale of hay, the reason why we see them all wrapped in plastic is a bale of hay will rot within 1 year. So you would think, well, why doesn't this hay last longer? Like, why doesn't everybody do it? And I mean, the truth of the matter is it's incredibly labor intensive. So while the hay lasts much longer, the crew that's needed to build these haystacks is much greater. And you can only work during daylight hours. So now if you go out to Montana and you see people who are baling with big, huge John Deere tractors, they might be working at midnight or 2 in the morning. They can pretty much hay all through the night, and it can be a single person. But the people that are committed to this, are committed. And one of the changes in terms of the crew structure happening today is that it's really about family. So you'll see 3 generations of family members working together. Usually there's a grandparent level figure who's, running key aspects of the the machinery, or it might be the next generation, depending. So this particular ranch is in the Big Hole Valley. The mountains you see in the background are actually they're Idaho. So this is in the southwestern corner. The picture before, this is up in the Avon Valley, which is in between Missoula and Helena. It's a smaller valley, really beautiful. I mean, they're both really beautiful, but very different in feeling. The Big Hole Valley is, by its name, it's just like a huge, vast kind of flat plateau. Both are alpine deserts, so they might only have 30 days of frost-free weather a year. But this also, I like this picture because it gives you the sense of scale, both of the hay and the landscape. And the Big Hole Valley has the nickname 10,000 Haystacks. So that's where the title of my project comes from. So when I made my first initial pictures with barehanded, I really didn't want to show any machinery or infrastructure in any way. I mean, the barns were a part of it, but it was really about this kind of more mystical connection to the land. And after I photographed this first year, I came back with some of these pictures and I thought, well, the equipment that they use for this process is really an important part of the story because they make it all by hand or they recycle like these old trucks. So this piece is called, and they all have names. So this is the hoist. And this truck is basically what powers the beaver slide. And the hand in the corner is actually a woman's hand. Most people think it's a man's hand. This is at the end when everybody goes up at the stack on the last day. And these are a couple of brothers that I photographed. So now I've been photographing these families over time. I've gone back every year since 2018, except for 2020 when I couldn't get out there. It's been an interesting project, and where I'm at now is also trying to figure out how I can push it in these different directions or what pieces I can explore so that it doesn't become boring. Because you might say, like, how many pictures of hay or haystacking can you have? This equipment, this machine is called a buck rake, and they take apart old trucks and tractors, and they literally make these by hand. They go forwards, but they're using the reverse gear. I've actually driven them. They're really hard to drive. You can ride on them. It's quite an experience. It's like being on an amusement park. So part of this project, I'm interested in how they create kind of land art in the process of making the hay, how it's sculpted. They use all flood irrigation, so they are impacted by the weather. So last year actually was a really bad haying year. They had a drought, and so they really didn't put out much hay. And many ranchers had to actually sell off cattle early because they weren't going to be able to feed them through the winter. So I'm playing around with light and shadow in this project. I've been backlighting a lot more. And then this was kind of an accident in a sense, which is what I love about photography, is that you work really intuitively and you're seeing without seeing with your eyes in a sense. And so I was up on top of the haystack, which is 30 foot tall and quite difficult to walk around on. And, I was probably focused on the hand with the pitchfork, but then when I printed this picture, what I really loved was this enormous green shadow. So I went back the next year really wanting to focus on the shadows, and it was a really weird weather year and there were all these storms. And so, the nature kind of thwarted my idea. But I've been thinking about how to sort of anthropomorphize the hay and the emotional qualities that it evokes. And then also as part of the project, which may come in as drawings or use of other archival material, is the heritage of these ranches. And it's a complicated history because obviously the combination of what the Army did in terms of hunting down and killing Native Americans on this land in the Big Hole Valley is also the Battle of the Big Hole, which is where the Nez Perce were massacred. The Nez Perce didn't live there, but they were chased by the Army to that location and pretty much wiped out until they had this big battle, and then several fled trying to get to Canada, and the army continued to pursue them. And then right before they reached the Canadian border, the US Army killed everybody else. So there are these horrendous stories of the past, and atrocities of, you know, land being taken and whose land is it. So these are all questions I'm grappling with, because there's, on the one hand, issues of manifest destiny and colonization and this very violent history. And then on the other hand, there's the present day of the ranchers and the people I'm photographing who are honoring the land in a way today and working it to have as low a carbon footprint as possible. So I always feel this tension in my work and thinking about how, in an authentic way, as you know, someone of who I am, I can explore these issues. So one aspect I want to highlight is kind of the complexity of who's working the land and then who has moved there. So this particular ranch, this boy in the beaver slide, is actually Amish. So this ranch, the Strodmans, their half brother and half sister who ranched together. Their mother was actually from Nicaragua, and there's a long, really interesting story, depending on time, I can always tell it later, about her coming to the US as a student and having one child and actually going through a divorce in the 50s and ending up in Montana, and then, you know, eventually remarrying this rancher and having a daughter. And Wally and Francis's kids don't want to ranch, so they bring these Amish, you know, men and women who are before the age of, I think, 21, they can come out to work the ranch each year. And then meanwhile, down the road are the Petersons, who are Scandinavian by descent. But there's still, you know, interesting sort of immigrant stories at work where that ranch, one of the matriarchs, is from the Philippines. So, I mean, it's also wanting people to expand their vision that, you know, if they think about Montana and they think about ranching and they think, oh, it's just a bunch of old white men, you know, that's not necessarily true either. And then I also just want to make beautiful pictures. And then I guess the last kind of aspect of the ranch life and what I'm seeing is the role of women and girls on the ranch. So this is Clara. When I first photographed her, she was 13. The kids start driving these machines at age 7. They work 12-hour days in the summer. So they work from, the hay has to dry out in the morning. They can't put it up when there's dew on it. So they work from about 10 till about 9 at night. They break for lunch, they break for dinner, they get a snack in the field. So, I mean, it's hard work. My kids couldn't do it, that's for sure. And so, you know, I've photographed Clara over the years as she's gotten older. She's 16 now. This was last summer, her brother, Finn. And this is the daughter of one of the Petersons who, her mom is from the Philippines and her dad grew up on the ranch. And she was teaching me how to kill gophers, which, you know, create holes that break cattle's legs. And then another part of the project I've been photographing in the remaining, or sort of the ghost towns that were the boom and bust mining towns in the various areas. And wanting to make pictures where it feels like you could almost still be there, or the buildings could be in use. This is a storm in the Big Hole. So I'm not really interested in kind of decay or, you know, what in photography we often call ruin porn. But I'm interested in the old machinery and how it relates to the landscape and to the human figure and the form. But again, like, I don't want it to be just a beautiful picture of an old truck. So I'm constantly looking for these comparisons or surprises, I guess. And the subtle differences from ranch to ranch, you know, they all use similar equipment, but it's all individualized. So this is the car seat that Alfred, the boy who's driving it now, you know, grew up riding in. when he was little. And his mom, who powers the hoist, tells me that she used to be nursing him and, you know, powering the hoist and lifting the buck rake. I mean, it's like 20 tons of hay at a time. So it's really heavy. Like this is his mom, Diana. So she would have sat in the cab of this truck nursing him. And this wire, the cable that she's standing on is what lifts the basket with the huge hay. And she's using the gas and the gears of the truck to power that. So it's an incredible process to watch. I've also been going to rodeos a little bit. And I've been looking in the archive. I found this amazing picture of some of the local cattle, the agricultural fairs where they would pose the cattle with like these beautiful backdrops. So I'm planning on bringing in archival material to the project. And then this was actually, I went out, so mostly I've been going for haying, but, you know, thinking about, well, again, how many pictures of hay can you have? I went for branding last May, which was, you know, another part of the process really. And this is a cattle hide or calf hide that when a young calf dies, if the mom is young and producing, they'll take a calf away from an older mom who's not producing. They'll skin the dead calf and then create this cloak and, you know, literally dress the baby in it. And they'll isolate the mother who's lost her calf with this new one for a couple of days so that she can smell the pheromones of her original calf and then adopt the new one. And then they take off the hide. And there's so much sort of ingenuity and engineering and science involved in all of this that I think it's really fascinating. So like if they leave the hide on for too long, it develops maggots and, you know, to be careful. And, you know, in terms of the equipment, things break and they figure out how to fix it on the spot. So, I mean, part of the tenacity of holding on to these projects comes in that it really allows for independence. You know, if something in a John Deere tractor breaks, they have to call in the technician and they have to stop working until that technician gets there. So this is another one in Bannock, which is one of the ghost towns that I've been photographing. This is the Methodist church there. And then these are, you can see the film on the side because these are just new scans I got. This was from last year. And because I've been working on the book of Barehanded, I really haven't been able to edit any of my new film. But it was kind of funny because I had my daughter Madeline with me and, you know, she's 19. And so we came out to the ranch at lunchtime and they all met her. And then we drove out to the field and all the boys had their shirts off, which they don't normally do. And so they were driving around and then it became a contest of, because the hay is really itchy. So it's not that comfortable, like who could keep their shirt off the longest. But I really loved, you know, just the like ribs and the architecture of the body and then against the machinery and the chains and, you know, so to me it was like a gift, but they didn't realize that at the time. And then the last thing I'm working on, or not the last, but one aspect of the project with these ghost towns is I went up to one called Marysville and they had this sign where they had collected the data of everybody that was buried there. So it was names, birth dates, death dates, age, but also then their causes of death, which I thought was really interesting. So I'm working on figuring out how to present this information, kind of rearrange it and present it in a way that tells a historical story. And for that, I'm going to make a letterpress print, will be the way that it's displayed. And I was just, this has nothing to do with 10,000 Haystacks, but the person that I'm collaborating with is in Miami, and he's actually wanted to collaborate with me for about 10 years. And I just really I didn't have an idea or figure out how I would transform one of my photographs into a letterpress and what it would mean. And so I told him about the cemetery sign, which we're working on. And then I also sent him some pictures I had taken of my son in my grandfather's bombardier jacket from World War II. And he just started off the collaboration by doing the top and making a letterpress print of this particular image. The Earthquakers was on the back of his jacket. And then I don't know if people read the text, or I can read it. The text is actually taken from a letter that I found that my grandfather had written to various members of my family right before he died. And my grandmother died this past fall, so that's why I just recently discovered it. And it says, I basically lifted part of the text from the middle of the letter, but it says, "I have felt his hand upon my shoulder. Go, my son, and I will be with you. So what may happen, it is his will for us all to accept. I will never doubt his wisdom and guidance again. Remember, God works miracles. So I'm sure in this revelation, he is saying, I am taking care of you. I believe he will give me the chance to go forth renewed and dispense." And I cut it off in the middle of a sentence. It really says something like dispense love, and it gets very like warm, but I kind of wanted it to be this like ambiguity of dispense what. And then his squadron was the Black Angel Squadron. So this kind of angel of death coming down from the sky is on a patch on his arm. So we took another photograph that detail I had taken, and Tom turned it into a plate for the letterpress. And yeah, I mean, this it's not completely out of left field. I'm working on another project that's about faith, and as part of that project, I'm thinking about how to bring in the idea of faith in the military and what that means, what this, these symbols mean. But this just gives you an idea of eventually the cemetery sign will be presented in some other texture and format. And then lastly, I was just going to share that one of the fun things that happened out of this project, or going there, was I was commissioned this past summer by the New York Times Style section, who the editor originally saw the photograph I took of the bees on the man's face and loved my work. So she commissioned 10 different photographers to photograph what Americans are really wearing. And she knew that I was going to be traveling, and I drove across the country with my daughter from here to Montana. And so I photographed pictures here and then in Fargo, North Dakota. And I was able to photograph one of the ranching families in Montana, and they made, double page spread in the New York Times, which tickled them to death. And then this particular picture on the left was chosen for the 2021 like best of style, which they pretty much think is hysterical, because what they see is that they need new jeans. And this picture, the picture on the, I don't think you can see my cursor, but the picture of the woman looking up on this page is also mine from North Dakota. And then on this page, that's Clara with a popsicle. I actually put the pictures in so you can see them bigger. So this is father and son. And this is Clara. And so these are all the pictures. They ran a certain number of pictures in the actual printed paper, and then all of these were run online. So this is Amr Fuller, local Leverett resident, and this is up on Mount Pollux. This is also local. This is in North Dakota, as is this. That's it. So I figure we can have questions. I can put the pictures back up if people have questions about particular pictures, or you can, ask me anything you like.
I have a question.
Okay.
My question is, if in the haystacks that they built in Montana that they let sit for 2 years, how do they then dig into them to use them to feed cattle without destroying the rest of the haystack?
Oh yeah. So basically they have feeders, So I'm trying to think, I do somewhere have some pictures of it, but they look like a huge cart. So they will go over and they, with like a arm of sorts, they'll go out to the haystack, they'll take hay off the clock, they'll put it in the hay cart, and then they'll feed the cattle from that and drop it on the ground, and then they'll eat it from there. So the haystack like slowly goes down.
But doesn't that allow water then to get into the rest of the haystack and damage it, or it just
it's
makes
too
a new roof?
No, I think it makes a new roof. I mean, it's really cold when they're doing that. So it's mostly like -20. So yeah. So it's not really an issue in that way. They have more of issues, like they have to protect from elk and from other animals eating the hay. So that's why the fences are there. But it's really, so they go up in one of the early pictures, the reason they go up on top of the pitchforks is they really tamp it down. So they're getting all of the air out, and that's more, it's less of so it's the whole thing's pretty compacted and then it shrinks. They really have to do that so it won't combust. Because if they don't get all the air out or they don't really pack it down, then it's basically a compost and they catch on fire.
Yeah.
Well, Holly, I was going to say, I was transfixed by the geometric lines and so many of your photographs. I thought you have such an eye for that. I'm wearing blue, but I was pea green with envy. No, it was riveting. I could have just looked at some of those and looked at the intersecting lines and all that. It's wonderful, really. Kudos.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just go back to I've been thinking about that a little bit more. Well, it is something that I sort of tried to highlight a bit more, like in the Geometry of the Land in the book that's coming out. But there are some things that's been pointed, like this one. Mm-hmm. What I tend to do, it's not the first time, but I also apparently tend to do diagonals from top left to bottom right, which I don't really know why, as opposed to the other direction. But yeah, so if you could tell me why that would be great. But yeah.
I thought it was a fabulous presentation. It was also interesting. And I was interested in the fact that the younger people do want to leave the farm.
It varies. So in the Peterson Ranch, for example, Alfred, the one that I told you that I showed was in the picture with the car seat. He's kind of the point person, well, his dad, Dean, is really tired of haying. So his dad, there's all this sort of interpersonal dynamics, and they're really like, at the end of the day, they laugh, they have arm wrestling, they're fight, like they also really love to have a good time. Oh, the one thing I forgot, I know I started explaining and then I stopped and got distracted. When I was saying what has changed is this whole, the family relationship and the fact that it's families working together, whereas in the early 1900s and through, I don't know, I'll have to ask them, like whether it's through till the 50s or if it even later, it was actually more of the miners and there was more migrant labor. So it was a really rowdy kind of drunken crew and like men that were not, as they would say, were not nice. And, sometimes had to be like thrown off the hay crew because they were so drunk, or they would go to town and get drunk and not come back. So it was more, it was hiring workers, whereas now it's family members and then their kids' friends for the most part. So, or it might be cousins. But yeah, so Alfred really loves the ranch, and there's usually, with the buck rakes, there's a whole bunch of them. The Gravely Ranch moves at a kind of slower speed. So there's maybe 3 or 4 people working buck rakes, whereas the Peterson Ranch, there's maybe 8 people working buck rakes. So it's really interesting too, to see the speed with which some of the crews work, and the Strodemans, it's 2 people working buck rakes. So it takes them a lot longer to put up a stack. But the person that's kind of the point person on the buck rake is the one that pushes the hay onto the, they call it the basket, the beaver slide, and everybody else brings it and just leaves it in those little piles. So Alfred, like, he loves the ranch, whereas his brother Malcolm, not so much, you know? And so I think it really depends. I mean, the Strodeman's, Frances was actually an Olympic skeet shooter, and her son was supposed to be as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the kids tend to go to college a lot in Montana. There's the daughters, Morgan, who I showed you the picture of with the rifle. She joined the Navy because she fell in love with somebody in college who became a Navy SEAL. But she wants to be a doctor, and her sister's in the Air Force and wants to be an engineer. So there's also a big pull of the military and the educational opportunities that the military are presenting to kids out there. So it is interesting. And, you know, it's when this next generation turns over, it's hard to say what will happen. And there's, in reality, like in the Big Hole, there's only 3 families putting up hay in this way. And everybody else has gone to baling. So.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Holly,
Yep, Catherine.
if you have one of the families with a larger crew, how long does it take them to put up one of those great big stacks?
So the larger crew, the Petersons, can put up a stack in about 30 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And they get it packed down enough so that it won't combust?
Yeah. So the process is basically, let me see. I'll go back. There's the mowing crew, which I don't really have any pictures of because the mowing crew is, the mowing is kind of boring looking. So this is a beaver slide when it's not in use, those pieces. So first they mow it into these rows like this. And there's a wheel rake. I mean, they mow it first and it lays down and it has to dry for 3 days. And then there's a wheel rake that comes and makes it into these rows. And then the buck rakes come and create those mini stacks, which they put up. Let me see. Yeah, and I don't have it in this presentation because it's not, I'm trying to think where you see. The Petersons will put up sometimes like up to 5 stacks in a row, which end up just being, you know, you can see it in this one. So that there in the background through the dirty windshield is probably about 4 or 5 stacks together. So that's about 100 feet long. And they can put up like that many in half a day, you know, so they'll work from 10 to 1 and then break. So they can put up to like 20 stacks a day if things are going well. If things break, then, you know, that's another story. Like I've seen cables break. I've seen hay get bunged up in there. One time they had to actually then something came off the rails and they had to take the whole beaver slide and tip it on its side to fix it. And they get like a little testy. You know, I try to stay out of the way. I mean, it's that whole expression of like make hay while the sun shines is no joke. Because then if it rains, they can't hay and they have to let it dry out. And then if it rains too much, then the hay can get ruined. So there really is like really a delicate process, and it's the livelihood essentially. You know, essentially it's what's going to get them through the winter. Yeah, but it's pretty incredible to see a stack like that go up that fast. And then what happens is the buck rakes will move on to the next. So say they finish a field, but they take it apart. And I can email, and you guys, I can find some videos if people want to see, because you can see the process in action in the video. I could actually it's pretty interesting, but they pull the beaver slide apart and then they start building the next one. So it's also segmented. So people are doing different roles. So someone might be topping a stack while the buck rakes are starting already to build the little piles somewhere else. So it's very efficient, and they communicate through like hand gestures and head nods, and there's a whole communication system as well.
Is that haystack only for them, or do they sell the hay? And if they sell the hay, how do they move it to another spot? They'll have to bale a roll or something, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, some ranches will like bale a bit and sell it. They can actually pick the whole stack up with a lift and move it. And the Petersons do that. They bring stacks down that are farther away in the winter for the cattle. If they can't move the cattle up there, they tend not to sell the hay to other people. I think that's something that, if you're baling hay and you have a surplus, they try to get a pretty exact science. I mean, they usually have some rollover to the next years. So like if there is a bad year, they have some protection.
Okay. Thank
Holly?
you.
Yeah.
That was really absolutely marvelous. I do have a totally different thought. I used to live in Fargo, North Dakota, and when I drove 5 miles outside Fargo, it was a whole different world altogether. So when I was watching your slides, I was just thinking you should give this exact presentation to an extremely urban audience. And then you should do this kind of a series in urban America, and you should do a presentation in rural America of this urban, so people, they're all all Americans, but really there's so much misunderstanding, and people don't know, rural people don't know what it's like in urban areas and vice versa. So I thought your project is marvelous, and it would be a good way of sharing the lives of people in rural communities within urban and vice versa. So that's just my little.
Yeah, it reminds me of
worth.
one of the galleries I worked with in Boston. When I had a show there, it was the Shorn picture of Kevin Ford over the Ram, and I forgot what she said about the picture, but something to that effect of how unusual it is. I was like, oh, but it's so everyday, and she's like, well, that's not my everyday, And it's like, oh, well, it's mine, But yeah. I know that has been a rewarding part of the project that, in the early days of making barehanded and through working in the Low Country, I really avoided discussing politics or religion with people. And, part of what got me to wanting to make the faith project that I'm working on now, which there were a lot of things, but was that most of these people are, most of them have a Christian practice of some sort, although they don't necessarily go to church. But what I realized was there was also a lot of faith and trust. I mean, they would house me, feed me, allow me in, for the most part, trust me to come and make pictures of their lives without demanding too much or, controlling too much about what was going to happen. But then as social media became bigger and bigger, and Instagram became more of a platform for artists where you had to promote your work. And I would share, obviously very left-leaning oriented art exhibitions. I started to wonder well, are they going to realize, I think it was a bit naive of me because I think they already knew that I maybe have some more liberal ideas than they might about certain topics. And will they not let me photograph anymore? But the reality is that the ranchers that I work with in Montana, yes, they, are conservative on many issues, but when it comes to the land, they're really not. And they really like a healthy debate. And, they're respectful of that fact. And that they're just, this idea of how divided we are, I think what's tricky is we can get into a box and think everyone who has a different perspective from us likes this division, which is obviously not true. So it's been really a rewarding way of building bonds and hearing, locally their different concerns and issues. And again, it comes back to when I was talking about sustainability, the complexity of everything, because, it's also simplified now in a way that we all know is not, the truth or healthy or pleasurable or hopeful or any of those things, so it's been really nice to know that connection is still there and can be built and experienced and shared. I call them all the time, you know, I call and I talk to them on the phone and about life, our kids, what I'm doing.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you.
You're muted.
Are there any other questions?
I think Gigi.
Holly? Oh, Gigi, you're muted.
Are you using film or are you working digitally?
Mostly using, I'm using both. Most of what you just saw was film. There are a few digital images in there. The stuff I shot for the New York Times, I shot digitally because, well, I shot some film. So even that is a combination. When I'm shooting for like the New York Times, the New Yorker, they're kind of funny. Like they want me to shoot film, but they only let me shoot a few rolls. So I have to do a combo. Yeah. But I still I love the way that film articulates light, obviously, but also like wood and skin and metal. It reads differently than digital, but digital in low light, and you know, there are some benefits to it. So I'm trying to make my digital look more like my film, but I use a medium format digital camera that looks like a film camera.
Thank you. It's wonderful work. It's lovely to see.
I know there's a way to make applauding hands in Zoom, but I don't know how to do it.
Well, you can unmute yourselves and just make noise. That was great.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'd be happy, you know, if anybody wants to, I can, I mean, I have some like random videos. I mean, it's funny when I'm in a, you know, when I'm in one mode, so I'm working with still photography and film, like I often you know, forget to even take some iPhone photos of, I mean, iPhone videos of the process. But yeah, there's lots, if you Google beaver slide haystacking, you'll find on YouTube, you know, you'll see like the whole process and hear the noise that goes along with it.
Susan, you're not proud of your daughter, are you?
Yeah. Holly, why don't you just close with telling them a little bit about the Faith Project, about the camps that you've been going to.
Oh, yeah. So there's a couple of different projects I'm working on. One is, so I've been photographing Methodist camp meetings in South Carolina that are racially separated. And so those only gather once a year in October. And that's what I went to, that's what I did the fellowship at Yale for, to study the history of that. And there's actually an exhibition, I'm having an exhibition at Rutgers at the Zimmerli Museum that's going to be opening sometime in March. It was supposed to open in January. I think they might have the pictures up now through August, and I'll be doing a talk at some point. I don't know, it's hard, as you all know, with COVID. But with that, I'm actually collaborating with a man named Maurice Wallace, who's a scholar. He's a Frederick Douglass scholar and an English professor now at Rutgers. He's been at a variety of other institutions, and he wrote some homilies to go with the photographs and introduction. So that'll eventually become a book. And then kind of coming out of that, 10,000 haystacks barehanded, you know, so thinking about the faith that people have when they work the land, thinking about the religious history of the US. And I might focus on Christianity. The church that I showed you is a Methodist church. And then I've photographed some other churches in South Carolina and different parts of the South. I really am interested in interiors and spaces where you can feel that people have been there. And I have this affinity for wood. So, you know, it's not every space that I go into that I want to photograph, but then I'm also making these contemporary, I call them contemporary, like these faith portraits with people, collaborative faith portraits, where I ask people to embody what faith means to them. And for that, I'm looking at, I mean, it's a really brand new project. So I've been working with dancers and, you know, rock climbers, so people, you know, who find faith in different ways. I photographed Amr's son who lost his father, and he's sort of embraced his Sikh faith, which here in the US, there are a lot of a faith practice might be brought out over by a man, and then there's a guru who you later find out is abusive in some way, so there's also the dissolving of faith. So yeah, it's kind of multifaceted, extremely broad, and new. But the camp meeting project I've been working on since 2017. It's just they only happen 1 week a year in October, and a lot of the camp meeting, well, all the camp meetings were canceled in 2020, and then last year one ran. So it's it's an evolving project, but I will be putting some more pictures on my website, the pictures that are going to be at Rutgers. And if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, you can sign up for I send out it's supposed to be a quarterly newsletter. I haven't quite gotten it to quarterly yet. I think it's like twice a year. But like when my barehanded book comes out, that'll be there. I'm going to do a pre-sale, I think, where the book will come with an 8x10 print of one of the pictures in the book. So yeah, there's lots of stuff happening.
Well, thank you so much, Holly. We really appreciate this wonderful talk. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your photographs with us.
Yeah.
And yeah, and Susan, what a wonderful idea. You suggesting Holly be the speaker this month. It's just great. Thank you all, and thank you the newcomers, and it's lovely to meet you all and see you in person in March at the Emma's Women's Club. Thank you all. And Hank, thank you very, very much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Norma, did you have a question?
I just wanted to know if you could give us your website. My husband's a photographer, and I know he'd be
Sure.
very interested.
Actually, yeah, here, why don't I can put it in the chat. Is that good?
Oh, okay. That's
It's just my name. So if you can remember my
Pretty
name.
easy.
Okay.
Thanks.
Easily findable.
okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful
All
talk.
right. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.